Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat? Tomorrow, officially, Wednesday, 3 o'clock Central Time, is when the NFL league year begins. That's when free agency becomes official. We are presently in the 48-hour legal tampering period, so you can see deals agreed upon, although not signed. And there have been deals aplenty if you've been following Twitter or any of the NFL news. And the two biggest name free agents for the New Orleans Saints that we're keeping an eye on, obviously, are Tyrann Armstead and Marcus Williams. And we now know that one of them will not be back in New Orleans, and that is Marcus Williams. If you have not yet heard the news, Marcus Williams has agreed to a 5-year, $70 million contract with the Baltimore Ravens. So the Saints and the Ravens have been two of the more stable franchises in the NFL over the last decade plus. Mark Ingram recently, of course, left the Saints for the Ravens before ultimately finding his way back to New Orleans. But Marcus Williams, who is a former third-round draft pick of the New Orleans Saints, is leaving the New Orleans Saints now for the Baltimore Ravens. 5-year, $70 million, $37 million guaranteed. Williams will turn 26 in September, so still very much in his physical prime. Was one of the cornerstones of this Saints defense, becoming one of the best in the NFL over the last decade, or over the last half decade, I should say, really since Marcus Williams arrived in New Orleans in 2017. So, man, this is a tough loss for the Saints. Not altogether unexpected, but if you look at Pro Football Focus, if you subscribe to that sort of metric, and you know how we feel here, Pro Football Focus is just a metric. I don't think it's the be-all, end-all, but it is something with merit that's worth considering. They've graded Williams among the top 7 safeties in the NFL each of the last 3 years. So you're talking about a very productive player who maybe doesn't get the national notoriety like some of his counterparts, has never been elected to a Pro Bowl or All-Pro, but certainly is warranted and certainly has played at that level, just maybe not as well known. He's probably most well known for the Minneapolis Miracle, for the biggest snafu of his young career. But this is a little bit of a bummer. And maybe we all collectively should have known that this was likely when the Saints couldn't sign him last year. The Saints have been very good about identifying the prospects that they want to retain and agreeing to long-term contracts with them. You know the names. They did it with Michael Thomas. They did it with Alvin Kamara. They did it with Marshawn Lattimore. They did it with Ryan Ramczyk. They identify those players and they re-sign them. The ones that they can't go the way of Trey Hendrickson and now Marcus Williams. And maybe one of the benchmarks of the Peyton Loomis era, which seems to have carried over, which would tell you maybe it's more so Mickey Loomis or even Gail Benson than it was Sean Payton, is they have a number. They have a number and they won't go over it. I mean, I mentioned Mark Ingram. That's a great example of it. When Mark Ingram left New Orleans for Baltimore, the difference in the contracts came out to be a couple of $100,000. I mean, it was negligible. But the Saints had their number, wouldn't go over it. Ingram decided to go test the open market and didn't command what he thought he might. The other reason why this is maybe should have been have foreseen is just to look at the Saints' history with the franchise tag since Sean Payton's been here. They've used it 3 times before Marcus Williams. The first time was in 2007 with Charles Grant. And Charles Grant they placed the franchise tag on Charles Grant. He had a brief holdout, and then ultimately they signed him to a long-term deal. He only played 3 years, though, under that long-term deal. So he didn't even make it to the end of that contract. In 2012, they used the franchise tag on Drew Brees before ultimately agreeing to a long-term deal with Brees. And then in 2014, most notably, they used the franchise tag on Jimmy Graham. And if you recall that whole fiasco, Graham wanted to be tagged as a receiver because of his statistics. The Saints argued that he was a tight end, which, of course, the Saints won that argument. The two sides did agree to a deal, but Graham never played for the Saints under that contract. They traded him to Seattle because that's really what caused the irreparable harm within the relationship between the player and the organization. So the times the Saints have used the franchise tag, it's generally not ended well. They don't do it often, and when they have, it's not been good by and large. Brees is the one exception, obviously, which gave them more time to agree to a long-term deal. But when they couldn't sign Williams last year and had to franchise tag him, it kind of gave you an idea that he was a guy that knew his value, wanted top dollar, thought he could get more on the open market, and apparently he did, as he's now agreed to this deal with the Baltimore Ravens. So, affordable draft picks become expensive veterans, and you can't pay everyone. And this is a lesson. You decide who you can pay and who you can't pay. They've paid the guys I just mentioned. They didn't pay Trey Hendrickson. They didn't pay Marcus Williams. It's not that they wouldn't pay them something, but they had a dollar amount, and there was someone on the open market who was willing to pay more, and those guys decided to go take more, and you can hardly blame them for doing that. Specifically on the field, you're talking about a guy that was back there playing center field and was a great communicator in your secondary, as a guy that sort of helped tie that secondary together with his play, and also added a lot of continuity. One of the big arguments for Dennis Allen was continuity, right? Maintain the continuity from among the coaching staff, coach to player, roster, everything. Well, now you lose a big piece defensively with Marcus Williams on the way out. And the obvious next question becomes, okay, well, who replaces him? There are a lot of reports about Tyrann Mathieu. We've talked about it a good bit here, and I would wholeheartedly endorse that. But the thing you got to keep in mind with Tyrann is that, and he may be the guy. Tyrann may end up being the guy that the Saints bring here in free agency who can fill that role. And when you look at that secondary, you'd have Tyrann Mathieu and Malcolm Jenkins and a young C.J. Garner-Johnson, who's sort of that nickel safety role, who could kick back and play safety if you need him to play free. But when you look at Malcolm Jenkins, who's a player into his mid-30s, and Tyrann Mathieu, now you're talking about veteran players, guys that aren't 26 like Marcus Williams is, that's going to be around for another half decade plus. You wouldn't think you're going to sign Tyrann Mathieu and get another half decade out of him at the level of play that you'd expect. Maybe a 2-year deal, if. Those are the kind of decisions that the Saints are going to have to make, but that's a big gaping hole in your secondary. Tyrann would be phenomenal because he's a guy who's still playing at an extremely high level, and he is one of the smartest players and opportunistic players in the NFL, certainly in the secondary. And for very obvious reasons, people here would love it if Tyrann Mathieu came home. He's a guy from New Orleans, played at LSU. We all know that. So I would wholly endorse the Saints bringing Tyrann Mathieu in to replace Marcus Williams in that secondary. But you got to understand, that is a Band-Aid. That is not a long-term solution at that position, not because Tyrann isn't a wonderful player and an all-pro caliber player throughout his career, but he's 29 years old right now. Marcus Williams is 25. He'll be 26 by the start of the season. So do you feel like you can get 5 years out of Tyrann Mathieu? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. So the Saints are going to have to be a bit more measured with whatever contract they might offer Tyrann, if that is the direction they go. But what we know for now is Marcus Williams will not be back with the New Orleans Saints. He's agreed to a 5-year, $70 million contract with the Baltimore Ravens. So the first big domino in Saints free agency this year has fallen, and it's leading Marcus Williams out of New Orleans. We'll wait to see what happens with Teron Armstead. Jameis Winston is still a big question mark, depending on what happens with the Saints at quarterback and Deshaun Watson. But we suspect the next 24 hours is going to be very busy for the New Orleans Saints. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.